Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with Changemakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. Welcome, Hank. Thank you for joining me. We've just had a bit of a chat for the first time ever, so we're arriving here not really knowing each other so well. But I have found you extraordinarily interesting, your commentary on LinkedIn. So I'm like, yes, let's bring Hank in and have a chat and learn more about Hank, because it seems that you have a very interesting history and have contributed quite a lot to the field of psychology. So if you'd like to tell us a bit of your story and kind of what inspired you to come along this professional path that you have done.
All right, I'll make it entertaining
Okay.
as well as I tell it. So we'll start in my childhood. My
Mhm.
story would start where my father would wake me up every morning saying, "How's this for a cover?" referring to Superman comics. He was the story editor of Superman for 30 years. So I went through high school. Why would I read social studies or study math? Reading Superman comics every single day. And I was a poor student, had trouble getting into college, finally got into one where 70% of the student body was thrown out of other schools. This was during the Vietnam era in the 60s. So you
Mhm.
had to stay in college or go into the army. I had the
Mm.
greatest 2 years of my life. It was wild. Card games every night. It was a lot of fun. I took a psychology test. The teacher inspired me. It was the first time I ever studied. I got the highest mark on the test. I became a psychology major. And then I
Mhm.
became a student
Mm.
and transferred to another school, which was an upgrade for me, although my friends still made fun of it, and just became a better and better student because I was interested. And this is an important point for parents that are listening, because my mother always used to say, "You'll find yourself when you are interested in something."
Mm.
Now, when I was going for my PhD, I had to take one of the required courses was in vocational psychology. And I started to see the importance that interests play in our um, development, because when you are interested in something, you automatically become curious, and then you seek more information and you become naturally competent. Nobody, Louis Pasteur's mother didn't say, "Use that microscope. I spent, $20 on, and study germs and so on." He wanted to do that. So then when I went to graduate school, grew up in the East Coast in America, in New York, Long Island specifically. I went to graduate school in the Midwest, which is within America a cultural shift in terms of the Midwest. You see that in American elections of how a state like Kansas will typically vote for Republican.
Mhm.
And that experience of 4 years in graduate school in Kansas was great because it changed my values for the better. I
Mhm.
know I grew up in an affluent environment. I had a swimming pool in my backyard, a tennis court. Uh, After Kansas, I didn't care what kind of car you drove, how much money you made. I only cared, what do you as an individual bring to the table? So my
Mm.
next stop was LA to do my internship, which was done at UCLA and the Brentwood VA hospital. I worked on the first ward in the country that was exclusively designed for Vietnam veterans. There were
Mm.
6 suicides in a year and a half. A national investigation from Washington came down to see what was going on this ward. So you can imagine, as a student, where my advisor said to me from day one, "Your job here is not to contribute anything, just to learn and get your dissertation finished. That's it." But to be caught up in this and see the dynamics of the ward were incredible. And in the VA system, because most people that are listening do not know how it works, you'd be getting $800 a month tax-free room and board to be crazy. So if somebody would come in and say, I'm going to commit suicide, that's good for 2 weeks in the VA. We nicknamed it, my friend and I, the Boss Spa. These guys are living in Brentwood, California, one of the most exclusive areas in the country, sitting out on lounge chairs and so on. They're getting paid $800. One guy came up to me and he said, Doc, next to the Miami VA, this one has the best food in the country. I looked at his chart. He'd go to Miami in the winter and he'd come back to LA during the summer. So anyway, when I was a graduate student, my last year, I came up with an idea. I noticed that people have trouble giving and taking criticism. Now, you hear, like when you look on LinkedIn and you see articles, people will use the traditional word, the bogus word, feedback. Oh, let me give you some feedback. And how do you give feedback to your boss and so on? This is so bogus to me, it's hard for me to take when I see that, because what they're really asking is, how do you criticize? But nobody wants to use the word criticism because they hear it as a negative. This subject, I saw a psychiatrist walk into a room in a mental health center. I was there as a student with some other friends, students, and he started criticizing a friend of mine in broken English, and she started to cry. At this time, this is about 1976, assertiveness was the hot subject. Everybody was doing assertive training. And I thought to myself when I saw this, forget about assertiveness. What about criticism? Nobody listening ever comes home and says, I had a great day today. I got criticized. Nobody ever says to their partner, honey, could you give me some more criticism? And we started using the word feedback. This happened in the 60s with the encounter group movement, where you'd have to go around in a circle and you'd have to give feedback to the person. And people would get very defensive. And instead of using the word criticism, that's what happened. We would use the word feedback. I've been kicked out of companies because they didn't want me to use the word criticism. You had to use the word feedback. Now you cannot pick up there's tens of thousands of articles on how to give criticism. I started that. That is one of the things I'm very proud of. The first book I wrote was a New York Times bestseller, and it came out in 1980, and it was called Nobody's Perfect. And one of the chapters in that book was how to give criticism at work. And I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal, So You're Afraid to Criticize Your Boss. The business school at UCLA, I was read it. They said, we want you to speak to our executives. What stands out the most is the head of the business school saying to me, you have to remember I was like 30, saying to me right before I start speaking to all executives, he said to me, now remember, you must be theatrical. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I had no fluff. I had no stories, just a few like clinical examples. All I had, I was like a thoroughbred horse, just let me out of the gate. All I had was content, and so on. And it took years to develop the fluff and the stories and so on. Right now, I'd say my style is a combination of Johnny Carson. You'll feel very comfortable, like I'm in your living room. I've done presentations in Paris, all over the world, where a couple will come up to me and say, could we take you home with us and so on, in terms of therapy. But I'm also a little like Larry David. I don't know if you know who he is.
Oh, I don't.
He can be very offensive. He's
Oh,
very funny. He created Seinfeld
yeah.
on that. But that is sort of my style. And then from the subject of criticism, I was in the VA one time, my internship in the library. I used to kill time by reading journal articles. And I found an article that a psychologist, Ray Navaco, had done at University of California, Irvine, on anger management. He took a cognitive, approach, like a stress inoculation type of model. And I remember saying to myself, this would be another good topic for a book after this. And so it was, called Dr. Weisinger's Anger Workout Book. The reason it was called the Anger Workout Book is that the number one book at the time was Jane Fonda's workout book. What do therapists always tell their patients about anger? You got to work it out. So now I had criticism and anger, and I now marketed them as the high performance skills. I was making the case you cannot be effective at work, let alone in your personal relationships, if you cannot give and take criticism, and if you cannot manage anger. Now, and I will still stand by that. I cannot think of authenticity, mindfulness. To me, that's all very low level. And not nearly although they're important, because you can't take criticism if you're not mindful of how you are reacting. You just don't have to use the word mindful. That's what I resent. Self-awareness. So let's just call it that.
Self-awareness is very good. Yeah.
One of the things I learned about psychologists is that they are excellent at coming up with little words that are the same thing that everybody else has been saying, but they make it sound new. And then they start trending, like psychological safety. Are you serious? You know how many times I heard that? I mean, and they act like it is original. Anyway, because I want to get more into dialogue, but so I had criticism and anger, used UCLA as a platform. The first book became a bestseller that created the speaking business. Then I wrote a third book on criticism just for the business community. Then I wrote another book on anger just for the working community. I'm very proud of the 6 books out of 2 subjects. That's damn good.
Nice.
Right.
Because you kept tailoring them to a different audience. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one time I'm talking to my editor for and my mother calls me on the other phone. So I pick up the other phone. I said, Mom, I can't talk now. I'm just about to suck an editor into another book on criticism. The editor heard me and laughed. It's called The Power of Positive Criticism. And I made it easy to read and so on.
Yeah.
And then I am now into the subject. Then I wrote a book on emotional intelligence. When the first book on emotional intelligence came out, I got 50 phone calls from my friends. I was actually quoted in that first book.
How did you get into writing about emotional intelligence?
Well, first of all, Dan Goleman interviewed me for his first book on the subject of criticism, which is a microcosm of emotional intelligence. You have to, because if I'm going to criticize you, I have to be sensitive to your emotional state. I have to look at your nonverbal behavior. I have to be able to manage my own emotions. I have to deal with your emotions if you start to get angry, which most people do, or defensive, or if you're just quiet and so on. So when I saw that on the cover of Time magazine, I said, you know what? I'm going to do emotional intelligence at work. And had no problem selling it and so on. It's actually, I would say, the best book on the subject of emotional intelligence, if you look at it. See, one of the things, once I write a subject, I want to move on. I don't want to create a whole life on one subject. That's boring.
Okay, you're prodding something in me here, because I could be saying that about ethics. I'm normally a short-term kind of thing for projects as well, and all of a sudden I'm on this long-term journey in ethics. So I'm wondering how I'm going to go with that. That gives me some chuckle, actually.
In terms of staying with one subject I mean, to me, there are some people who do that, but for me, that is boring. I told you, my father was the story editor of Superman. and
Mm-hmm.
wrote thousands of magazine articles. I
Mm.
grew up in I didn't grow up in an academic environment.
No.
I grew up in a creative
Yeah.
environment. So the only way I would ever do research is if I had 20 graduate students doing it on that. I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I like to go from different subjects. And
Yeah.
the last one, or the current one,
Mm-hmm.
is on dealing with pressure. And
Mm-hmm.
I find that it's just going to become the most important skill in the way the world is coming, is developing now. I found people that you can be emotionally intelligent but still choke in a pressure situation. And on the other
Yeah.
hand,
So
you
I was
can.
going to ask you about the through line, if there is a through line of the other writings that you've done on the other topics to now this pressure topic that you're writing.
Is there a, say it again,
A through line.
a true line?
Through line. Sorry, I'm Australian. I don't speak
True
American
line.
English.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, if there's a thread running through all of them that kind of
Yeah.
connects them. Yeah.
The thread is this is a problem for people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've identified subjects that are problems for people
Mm-hmm.
and are essential to their effectiveness in life. And that is dealing with criticism. Because remember what criticism is, it's evaluation. And you're hardwired to do that. Early man, if they could not evaluate which fruit was good and which fruit was poisonous, which tribe was friendly, which tribe is an enemy, that would be a big problem. Anger, you can see, was a microcosm just for managing your emotions. So I could walk into an organization and have your listeners do this. I want everybody to say, what are the three most common emotions you experience daily? I already know what they're going to say. Some of them are going to lie and say enthusiasm. It's usually anger and anxiety, and sometimes enthusiasm. But the question is, are you more frequently anxious or are you more frequently enthusiastic? Are you more frequently angry or are you more frequently uh,
Is it?
enthusiastic? See, in a corporate world, nobody wants to acknowledge that they're angry.
No, this is true. But like in a day of experience of emotions, I've always thought it's more that we actually experience many more lovely moments, and we can describe that however we want. I tend to say joy just because it's a lower intensity than the others. But it's very common, and we're just not attuned to it because we get heightened up when we are anxious, or we get heightened up when we are angry. But if we're experiencing that contentedness or that joy, or there's many moments of that kind of peacefulness of the day, and we're just not attuned to it. So I don't know that we're always reaching for enthusiasm.
No, I agree that we're not. You can't be, because enthusiasm is many times is the result of an event, happening. That's why it's important to know how to make yourself enthusiastic. Like if you have to give if you have to give a podcast, and you've had a rough day and you're really not in the mood, and it starts in 1 minute, how can you make yourself enthusiastic? And I will say the
Mm.
answer is in the second section in my book, Performing Under Pressure. There was a movie called Hoosiers, basketball movie. Gene Hackman star. And
Hmm.
there's one scene about a high school basketball team where before they go out on the court, before he goes out on the court, he has everybody stand around and clap louder and louder and louder until they become so enthusiastic they run out. Now you see every basketball coach do that. That's one of the ways that you can make yourself enthusiastic and so on. I used to remember Muhammad Ali?
Hmm.
For a presentation, I remember I was once in Kansas City. I was going to speak to the butter company, land of lakes. And I went to graduate school in Kansas, so I still had friends there, and it was out, the night before. So, and it was at a big hotel. So the person who's introducing me sees me sitting in one of those lobby lounge chairs, just like leaning back. And she comes up and she says, "Excuse me, Dr. Weisinger, are you going to be a little more enthusiastic before your presentation, during your presentation?" I said, "Don't worry about it. I just don't want to waste it." And then 2 minutes before she introduced me, I got up and I gave 5 minutes, 2 minutes of the alley shuffle, dancing around, jazzed myself up.
Mm.
So when you talk about, those moments, what I've observed, see, some people can be that, and then all of a sudden they start getting anxious and they notice a shift in arousal in their physiology. That's why I think it's important for people to learn, how to identify. That's where self-awareness comes in, to be able to use your physical cues that something is changing, that your emotional landscape is changing. If you find your heart zooming up, that is a cue that how you're talking to yourself probably isn't helping you. Because what would you have to say? If you're on the beach with your granddaughter and your heart zooms up because you can't see her, I know what you're thinking. And it's one of those threatening thoughts, and so on.
Yep.
So that really has been the theme that I have really found as a psychologist, is I have seen the zeitgeist of problems, that people have problems managing their emotions. I could go into a company, and the number one emotion that people would want to be able to deal with would be anger. That would be the most frequent emotion that some people would say frustration, but frustration is just the lower level of anger. See, if you can't recognize when you're frustrated, how are you going to handle yourself when it's full blown and then you're really out of control? And I found, in terms of all the issues of communication, nobody really has trouble saying, "You did a great job." See, this is what's so ridiculous when they use the word feedback. Nobody ever has trouble giving, quote, positive feedback, if you want to use that word. And there's no such word in psychology as negative feedback.
What about the word or the terms critical feedback?
Well, the critical feedback, as long as you interpret the word critical as important rather than critical as flaw finding. See, one of the things I found is that critical means flaw finding. Flaw finding doesn't help. The idea of criticism is to be able to communicate information and evaluation. I read your paper, your marketing report. So my job now is to be able to evaluate your marketing report and communicate that evaluation back to you in a way that allows you to use it to your advantage. In this case, making your evaluation report more effectively. If I say to you, "This report stinks," that is not going to make you receptive. So as a ground rule, anytime you have to criticize anybody, I don't care who it is, whether it is your mother, whether it's your daughter, whether it is your boss, always start out thinking strategically by saying, "How can I communicate this information so the person is going to be receptive to it?" I remember one person would say, "How do you criticize a boss who always gets defensive?" And yet they ask for you to be honest. I said, "Well, good question." I said, "Well, there are 100 ways." What I want everybody to understand, see, this is the problem I have with, quote, feedback models. Tell the person what they did, why it's important, how it's going to make a difference. Thank you very much. Yeah, what if the person says, "That's your opinion," or "I disagree with you"? One of the things my editor was very clear with me is to remember the other person doesn't know the rules. They don't know, if you speak respectfully, they're supposed to say, "Hey, that's great. That really helps me." So the astute listener is hearing me say a couple of things. always anticipate defensiveness anytime you criticize anybody. Because if you anticipate it, then you could start to figure out in advance what is the best way to overcome it. Do you know who Tom Brady is?
Yeah.
Okay, one of the ways that Brady is a lot like me is that he always anticipates the defenses that they might throw at him. And therefore, he can figure out in his mind and mentally rehearse what is the best way to respond. And also, anytime a person gets defensive, the standard response I've observed that most people will say is, "You're getting defensive," which will only make the situation worse. What I
So
would
your current book now is helping us move through all of that because they're all pressure points that we're finding ourselves in. You're going to teach us how to manage those pressure points.
Yeah, I haven't thought of it like that, and and so on. But that would be one way of, because for most people, taking criticism is a lot of pressure. But but as a giver, I want people to realize that anytime the person gets defensive, that is a cue that you're being ineffective. If you
Mm-hmm.
were effective, the person would not get
Mm.
defensive. And the faster you can recognize when you are ineffective, the faster you can respond more effectively. The faster a company realizes this marketing's not working, the faster they can change. So part of emotional intelligence, to go back to that subject, and self-awareness, is how good are you at recognizing when you're ineffective? Some people, it takes them longer and longer and longer. Some people let their ego get in the way because they can't admit this doesn't, this doesn't work.
It's
So
another
again,
layer. That's another layer to managing the pressure points. Yeah.
that's right. So the problems of managing one's emotions in terms of anger, which there are cognitive ways of managing anger, correcting your irrational assumptions. I would say that 95% of the time people get angry, it's because of distorted thinking. We tell things like we think we magnify the importance of it. Like if you're going to be 2 minutes late to a meeting, you make it a disaster.
So, I'm going to chop you in right there. And you've covered some of the things we're going to move into, but not everything that I'd like to speak to today. And so the next question is around, what do you think has been your the impact that your work has had so far? And you've mentioned quite a number of things that have been groundbreaking across time. Is there anything that we don't know about that you are particularly proud of that has had a significant impact?
No, the best impact for me is, when you give a presentation, you get evaluations, or when somebody comes up to me and they say, "This really helped me." I once did a retreat for a law firm in California, and it was a very successful law firm. Everybody had success by the traditional California metrics, how much money and what kind of car you're driving. Okay. So they were all had that. And one guy told me, he actually wrote me a letter telling me that his wife had cancer, and my presentation made him realize what is really important.
Mm,
And so that I felt was a significant impact.
yeah.
I always say my philosophy of my own work is, I think this stuff can help you, but you have to apply it and you have to use it, and that I cannot do. I'm proud of the fact that I help a lot of people with expecting nothing in return, because that's the psychologist part. This is one of the differences between psychology and coaching, I found, in terms of ethics.
Yes.
Really not familiar. I assume there is an ethical guidelines for coaches.
Yeah, there's a number of them. And this kind of leans into the next question, was about how ethics shows up in your decision making, and if you could give an example. So you continue on, but yes, the different coaching bodies have ethical guidelines.
Little Johnny is in school and he comes home one day and he goes to his dad and he says, Dad, we had a discussion of ethics today and I really didn't understand it. Can you explain it to me? Kid says, go read, learn yourself. And the kid says, nah, come on. And he says, all right, I'll tell you what ethics are. As you know, I'm a dry cleaner. And as you know, Mr. Smith comes in every day with his blue suit to be dry cleaned. And as you know, I always go through the pockets. This time, I found a $20 bill. Now pay attention, because here's where ethics come in.
Yeah.
Do I or do I not tell my partner? Get it?
Yeah.
And I have found, I remember there was a guy I used to teach at Wharton, and they had an ethics guru come in. And I used to get into arguments with him. I'm saying, I don't understand. This should be in a philosophy department. I said, why? Where does ethics come in business world? There are no ethics in business. You want to be delusional and think that there are? You want to look at all the CEOs, all the billionaires? You want to look at all the ethical principles? You want to look at Facebook and Zuckerberg and seeing his ethics in terms of bending the knee with Trump or and Bezos and so on? I said, ethics for one company is if we can stop secretaries from stealing yellow pads, we can save $50,000 a year. I said, that's where ethics comes in a business world, which is about making money, not about ethical behavior, because every day, politics we see in all governments, all corporations, governments, we see a lack of ethics. So I don't understand and then I see in terms of like psychology, I consider that I really have, like I don't talk about patients. One of the things I find about coaches many times is they have no problem talking about their patients or clients, they would call them. I don't get that. I find that many in coaching, you could not do this as a therapist, that many coaches will say a 6-session package. Or are you familiar with that? And you say, now, you're into ethics. How's that ethical? That's taking freedom of choice. A psychologist would get kicked out for doing that. That's like you have to sign up for 6. Really? What if I don't like the first one? My daughter is a coach, and I felt very proud of her when she said she doesn't do that. She says, if you want to cancel, then you cancel.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a big discrepancy for me. I find I see more seminars for coaches on how to have a successful practice
There's a few.
than helping people.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big difference. And I say that give me some skills that you would say of coaches. What would you say are
Well,
coaches?
I don't see them being that different at all to being a therapist,
I,
right?
yeah, except that you can't learn to be a therapist in a 2-month certification course.
Oh, exactly.
I think the training. I mean, I remember going with my daughter. I said, I'll pick the program that you'll go through because I knew some of the people. And I'll tell you the truth. The only thought is I looked at these coaching programs and they all had modules on emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, my first thought is I should be teaching this.
Yeah.
This this person knows the subject. He knows my book
Yeah.
on that. So those are some differences I found in terms of the package. I find that the training is very different with the human life. And I find that most coaches that they market in terms of business making money rather than really helping a person. That's what's comical about to me on LinkedIn. Everybody's a great coach. Everybody coaches executives, and so on. Believe me, the most successful ones are not on LinkedIn.
No, that's interesting. I've had some conversations with people who aren't so well known in the public space, but they've had a huge impact on the profession across time. So I just want to move
And
in.
I find this is
Yeah.
what I said. What are you look at the coaching skills, you can say there's not a much difference. That's because you are a therapist. What you're really saying is that you can do what a coach does, but a coach cannot do what you do.
Oh, is that what I'm saying?
That's how I look at the difference between psychologists and coaches. A coach cannot handle a bipolar.
No, this is true. They may not realize that what they're looking at. And it reminds that what you just said then reminds me of one of the very first coaching clients I had, which just spun me around in circles, and I just went, this can't be what I meant to be doing. And I that was like my 4th year of psychology at university, so I wasn't even into my practicum at that point. But I had been trained as a coach, so I was sitting there, just my head spinning, with this woman who clearly needed therapy. That was very clear. But wow, I had to guess along the way, just trying to figure out what the hell we were doing. And so, I mean, that was me as a newbie, and I wouldn't say that happens now though, but I imagine new coaches would struggle to understand really what they're looking at.
It's you need. That's why I don't want to sound like I'm saying, quote, I'm smart. It's because I'm older. So so somebody who is 50 cannot possibly be as well read as somebody that is 76. Now, when that person is 76, they might be much more well read than I am and knowledgeable. I'm just saying, in the field of psychology, and I think in coaching, remember some of the great, people were coaches 1,000 years ago. They didn't take any certification course, and people were therapists. The idea of change, it used to be the stars were the reason for,
Mhm.
behavior in change. I'm just saying is that it's also the content that coaches are exposed to. It has
Mhm.
taken you years and years to get the appropriate amount of knowledge of human behavior and how to deal with it and so on. So the coaches do not have that repertoire of dealing. They can't because they don't have the training. A year in a certification course is not enough. What reading a book on positive psychology?
Oh,
Uh,
come on. My book's pretty good.
you know that.
It'll take your
But what
place.
I'm saying is, it would be like just reading a book on behavior therapy and then being
Yeah, yeah,
nothing,
yeah.
nothing else. That's the
Hmm.
problem with coach. If coaching was a 4-year graduate degree, that would be different. Um, and I think you get more competent people. Remember, the idea of coaching, to my knowledge, really started in LA. People became personal trainers, personal coaches, and wellness, lifestyle coaches, they used to call them, because you didn't need a certification. You didn't need a degree. You just call one, especially for women. If they were good looking and they look good in jogging clothes, then they could make a fortune in Beverly Hills. Oh, man. That's where that idea of coaching really started to come out.
So the challenges are about how you promote yourself as a coach and whether we're skilled enough if we haven't undertaken enough education in the background. But I want to ask you, you've told us a lot about you, but I want to know like a personal story about you. It doesn't have to be from the personal space, it can be at work. Is that a time when you had experienced a significant challenge and it challenged you, and how you managed to maneuver through it and the impact it had on you.
I will go back to graduate school. There comes a time when you're in a PhD program in psychology where you have to take comprehensive written exams. This is the last opportunity that the department has to get rid of you on that. And there would be like general essay questions on that, like compare and contrast 3 theories of psychotherapy and so on. It was a challenge for me because they kept making me take them over and over. They kept finding things that were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's all personality. I was a kid from the East Coast that saw Kansas as a stopping point on my way to LA. I was the type where I would say to a psychopathology teacher, shows you my low awareness at the time. How could I be so stupid to say to a psychopathology professor, can I take the test 2 days early so I can go to Hawaii and meet my parents? Nuts. And it was really depressing because it was like, they're not going to let me out of here. And a teacher said to me, as he was going over my answers, he looked at me and he said, the question was this: you're hired by a company to construct a test that will predict successful salespeople. Okay. So it's a test construction question. You had to go through everything. Where do you get the items, validity, reliability, psychometric, and yada, yada. But he looked at me and he said, we're talking about the questions. He said, for example, Hank, if I wanted to construct a test that would identify successful students who get through a PhD program, not all the items would have to do with psychology. Years later, when I, was finished and so on, after my interest, I went back and I brought that incident up. I said, were you communicating something to me in that? And his response was, I don't know, but probably. And that was a really stressful time. I used my friends. I had a good support system.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, it's you don't take it over the next day. You got to wait.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very stressful because I kept making the mistake that it was content, and it wasn't content.
Mm-hmm.
It was stop acting like a jerk. And it was a humbling experience, very anxiety arousing experience. All that somebody in any crisis would go through. What's going to happen to me? Fail. And put my life on hold. But I made it through. I consider myself, this is another thing that I want people to remember.
Mm-hmm.
People say, oh, you were resilient. Life is resilient. There has been, and this comes out of the positive psychology field, a big deal about resilient people as though they are special. And now we're going to, a resilience seminar, increase your resiliency. Here are the 10 steps or whatever. I get sick, I get better. I'm resilient. My mother got sick. She got better. She's resilient. The tree burns down, another one grows back. Life is resilient. The question is not, the emphasis should not be on resiliency. It should be on why are some people not resilient. See, that's why depression is an illness, because it's not the norm. You should be resilient. Nobody has to teach you to be resilient. This is another example, and I myself am guilty of it, of taking natural parts and exploiting them. I've exploited the concept of managing your emotions in the form of commercializing it into managing anger books on that. So I think that is...
Was there ever a time around any of the commercializing of your work where you had to really step back and think, there's two pathways I can take here, or just, you know,
I always took like the character in Son of a Woman that Pacino was defending. I always took the right path when it came to professional uh, ethics. Otherwise, I'd rather not. I'd rather not do it.
mm-hmm.
On the
Mm-hmm.
there was one time I will say that I was going to sell out, which was they used to have, like infomercials.
Mm-hmm.
So a company from South Carolina contacted me and they wanted me. They had like, this is when selling on TV was just starting to become a big thing. So this was about 1986. And they wanted me to do a package on criticism and anger. They were going to fly me their studio, with tapes and so on, buy now and so on. And I was ready to do that. Then they called me about a week before I was supposed to go. And they say, good news and bad news. They said, the bad news is for you. We can't do it. The good news is we sold our time to home shopping. They sold their time to the home shopping network. And I lost out. That was the
Holy.
time you would have seen Dr. Hank talking about criticism and anger, the new power skills. That was it. Other than that, I can't stand when people break those professional violations. The content of the material is very important to me. I like to think that uh, academic integrity in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the content is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. So you've already given us so much, more than I realized, to be honest. And thinking about, you've got more to give yet. So what do you think what would you hope that your legacy would be?
My next book, the one I'm working on now, that is what I am most excited about. I will get back to it as soon as we are finished.
Okay, so that's on pressure,
No,
managing pressure points.
no, that's in the pressures in the past. I would like to tell people my website because there's a lot of free podcasts, other podcasts, articles. It's
Mm-hmm.
a, it's a, there's nothing to buy. It's just a resource
Mm-hmm.
uh, tool. There's a good lecture on emotional intelligence on it. And it's just pressuremanagement.org.
Okay.
But my next book has nothing to do with that.
Oh, I've been thinking the whole time that your next book is
Oh,
on.
the next one I believe could be a Netflix episode. That's a Netflix series. That's what I'm hoping for.
Okay, I totally missed that point. That's hilarious.
Now
Well,
is your now you say, well, what is it on? Tell us. Don't keep us.
I thought I knew, right? And so, yes, what is it on?
The title is Bad Wine.
Bad wine.
Subtitle, The Naked Truths of Senior Dating and Maybe How to Handle Them.
Are you for real? This is
I am
it?
for real. It is about it is about senior dating. Some people will consider it a comedy, others a horror, others science fiction.
Okay.
Uh, I see it as a Netflix, and I'm writing it as though, as a psychologist who loves TV and movies, as though it would be a Netflix series. So rather
Uh-huh.
than linear,
Mhm.
there's like the different chapters would be different episodes. Like
Mhm.
one is called The Dating Matrix, and it's just about online dating and all the things that are required. Another, I've had 3 matchmakers call me,
Mhm.
um, for their clients. They got my profile maybe off LinkedIn or whatever, and I'm calling that thing job interview because that's what it's like. They're going to interview me. It's like a job.
Mhm.
So I'm very excited. And the theme, 3 things that characterize senior dating.
Mhm.
One, deception.
Mm-hmm.
That's why nobody can, it works. Everybody lies. They create their own avatar. Everybody uses old pictures. I don't. But the reality is, so I put my real age, 76. There was no woman that's looking for a 76-year-old guy. A 70-year-old woman wants to go out with a 65-year-old guy. I have unbelievable stories. So that's the first thing. There's deception in everything. Every
Mm-hmm.
woman says, I'm financially independent. Yeah, except when the check comes, then they're not financially, independent and so on.
Okay.
You're
Next.
saying this every senior will relate to this.
Okay.
The second theme is that there are a lot, the line I'm using is that there are a lot of Eleanor Rigby's in the senior dating world. What does that mean to you?
You tell me what it is.
Do you remember Eleanor Rigby?
Yeah,
The
vaguely.
song, All the Lonely People. So what I've noticed that there are a lot of seniors, and obviously I'm talking about women, who would rather go out with somebody, even if they don't like them, just to go out. See, I'm not like that. I'd rather write and so on, do a podcast with you, watch TV. What am I running out? My daughter, when I told her I was going to Dylan, she said, "Oh, you're going by yourself?" I said, "It's not a date. Why would I pay $400 to take somebody else? Are you crazy?" So that is the second thing. And
Mm-hmm.
the paradox is that it is their deception that keeps them lonely because they're not presenting themselves as a real person. So how can they possibly connect with somebody?
Mm-hmm.
They can't. And the third theme is what I call hard truths, which are realities that are so anxiety arousing for seniors. They would rather delude themselves thinking that their soulmate is just a click away. And one is, for example, you have no idea how many women profiles start out like this is where I got the title, like they're aging like a fine bottle of wine. I said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Show me a woman that goes to a plastic surgeon and says, 'Can you make my ass sag?' That's not going to happen. No woman goes to a plastic surgeon and says, 'Make me look worse.'" And it's the same for me. I look very different now than when I was 30 on that. So that is something that you're not getting better. You are getting worse. You're not getting better physically. I could play tennis for 4 hours when I was 30. Now 15 minutes seems like a center court match at Wimbledon. I'm dying. Yet you're not getting better. Another hard truth that people don't want to accept is you're not going to meet anybody. You're going down by yourself. Get used to it. I went out with one woman. I said to one matchmaker, I said, "Please tell me that this woman is not looking for a long-term relationship." So he said, "Oh, she is." I said, "Well, to me, that's comical. Tell me how a 70-year-old is looking for a long-term relationship." I went out with one lady. She said, "This relationship is over as soon as I have to help you go to the bathroom." And I'm thinking the same thing. I don't want to help somebody to go to the bathroom. You know how many women say to me on their dating profile that they exercise? Are we recording still?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
And I'm going, I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this right now.
but you know how many say, and
But it's part of your book, right?
I'm sure men do this too, but how many women will they do Pilates 5 times a week exercise. And then when I see them coming, they're hobbling and they need to be helped get up. Seriously. So those hard truths, I've already accepted the fact. That's why I have my granddaughter on that. I'm not looking. That's what I'm going to tell this matchmaker. I said, the women that I would want to go out with, if they were to go out with me, you'll appreciate this as a psychologist. I'd have to say they'd be psychotic. Well, it would make no sense.
So this is the makeup of your next book and moving into
Bad one.
this
I think it's a
period.
winner. I think every senior, because I'm going to, what you see positive psychologists say is, oh, be in a relationship and so on, and it's good and stay connected and yada, yada. Wrong. number one is do what is good for yourself and what you like, and to be creative. What positive psychologists have missed is they're emphasizing relationship engagement over creativity as you get older. And I am saying that at least for me, I'd rather, my creativity is a much better source of personal gratification and growth and excitement and enthusiasm than driving 50 minutes into the city for a date. I can't even think about it. It's bad wine, man.
So you hope,
You have the last chapter, the last episode?
what's that?
I'm on my way to meet you'll like this, to meet the perfect date, no judgment, just fun, my granddaughter.
Ah,
That good?
yeah, it's very good. I like this one. So you're hoping that your legacy will be that you're helping seniors navigate relationships.
My legacy, the only legacy that's really important for me, to be honest, is my son and daughter and my friends thinking of me. I
Yeah.
really don't care about professional legacy. It's like I'm listening to Dylan the other day, and they say it must be great that, like, a Rolling Stone was voted the greatest song of all time. And he said, yeah, for now. Next year they could vote another song. What does that mean? So, so professional legacy, my ego is not that. It doesn't bother me, because before I got into the subject of criticism, Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato did. Now, if you're asking me, is it nice? Do I like that Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates thought like me? Absolutely. The great Henry James wrote a book called The Art of Criticism. Do I like the fact that Henry James thinks like me? Yeah. But I'm also saying, let them have the legacy. I know that I think like Aristotle and Socrates, so I don't need anybody else to say it.
Mm-hmm.
So just legacy to my kids and my close friends.
And I think that's the nice thing about it, is that it doesn't have to be what other people think of it. It can be just what you believe it was, with what you do and how you are in the world. So that's kind of the point of it all. So you've got that. That's great. So last question for you. Ready?
My father had a bigger legacy because he was the story editor of Superman.
Yeah.
That's the most famous superhero in the world. And
Yeah.
he co-created Aquaman.
Do you know I have a photo of an upside down Superman kissing a woman, and it was painted on of a wall of in Paris,
Nice.
and he was upside down. Yeah, it's great. Took a photo of it. It's very nice. What do you think is the most pressing issue in your profession, so your psychology today?
Competency.
Hmm?
Competency of the therapist.
Yeah. Do
There's
you
so
think?
many bogus people. I am shocked. Look, you can't know everything, and no program can encompass everything.
Mm,
But for me, it is amazing that young psychologists, their training is so different. Everything has become biological, neuro, and theories of personality, theories of psychotherapy do not seem to be taught. On the other hand, programs seem to be longer, so maybe they are getting more content. Competency has always been an issue for me, because in the program that I went through, everybody was smart, but there were only two other people I would ever send a patient to. I don't want my people I care about to see these other people.
I
So what if they can do research?
Yeah, there's something I've long wondered, and that was when I was lecturing at the University of Wollongong, and I was lecturing from year 1 students through the year 4 students. And I would look at them in year one and I go, I can tell who's not going to end up doing something with this. I don't know if they'll last the 4 years. You could just kind of pick they were there for other reasons. But then when they get to year 4, I go, were they like this when they arrived, including me? Or 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 does the studying of psychology make them where they end up?
Well,
Maybe a combination.
in at least the way my friends and I experienced it, graduate school in either clinical or counseling psychology is really like you going through therapy. The counseling practicums, it was me, my 2 friends, and this girl that none of us could stand because she would always start crying. And it was 3 hours, the counseling, and what would you have to play a tape of a student that you saw in the counseling center. But after 20 seconds, the teacher would turn off the tape and he would say, how come you said that? And it became like therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We felt, the 3 of us felt, if we got through that practicum, which was on a Monday, we made it through the week without being exposed and so on. And it was intense, but learning. Because one of the things he taught us that if you need somebody else to tell you you're a good therapist, then you have a problem.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thought.
Right. So that was and here's the funny thing. He got thrown out for an ethics issue,
Ah,
having sex with a student on his desk.
ah.
He used to give us ethic lectures in therapy all the time. This was the hypocrisy. This is what would drive the students crazy.
Did that happen while you were there as a student, or it was later?
No, that was when I was there.
Yeah.
I knew the lady.
Mm-hmm. So he was found out and kicked out while you were still there as well.
Yeah. Ended up at a VA, Veterans Administration Hospital in Oregon. Comical when you think about it. Another one of my friends walked into the head of department's office and he saw the guy put a bottle of like bourbon in his desk drawer, and he said to my friend, some things are better not said.
Well, things
So,
happen.
this was a time where therapists were having sex with patients.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't illegal. Now it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only unethical. And when I was working at the VA, one of the consultants to the ward from UCLA was Dr. Ed Schneidman. He billed himself as a professor of thantology at UCLA, life and death. He was the world's expert or country's expert on suicide. He started all the suicide prevention centers in Los Angeles. He had the best clinical skills I've ever seen. He used to interview these schizophrenics in front of a group and just bring them out. They were so withdrawn. He's amazing. So I once asked him, I said, Dr. Scheinman, is it ethical for a therapist to have sex with his patients? And he thought for a moment and he said, yes, if the situation is right, but I cannot think what would be a right situation.
There we go.
I thought that was a great answer
Yeah, it was a very good one.
on that.
So at the end of we're thinking about competency, and of course, making decisions like that is all about a competency as well. I want to say thank you for joining me. We are now finishing this recorded
It's been
component.
fun.
You enjoyed it?
I enjoyed it. It was fun talking with you.
Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it, and hope the listeners get something concrete. Let me just say 4 quick points. One,
We're
just to
still
review,
recording. Yeah.
on criticism as a tip for giving is always think strategically. How can I say this so the person will be receptive to it? And for taking, that if the person gets defensive, then that is a check on your thoughts. That anytime somebody criticizes you, no matter how destructively it is given, assume that the person is going to say, this is terrible. Then your response is, tell me which part is the most terrible. If an editor says this manuscript stinks, tell me what part stinks the most. To use what the person is saying to work for you. I would say for anger, because anger can be an escalating process, remember it's a behavioral option, that you have a timeout technique. I'm beginning to feel angry and I want to take a timeout. You're not blaming the other person. You're making me angry. Beginning to feel. You're recognizing anger in the early stages and you're showing yourself self-awareness. And don't say, I need to take a timeout, because that implies you're past your limit, but rather I want to take a timeout because conscious volition keeps you in control.
Yeah.
So take a timeout, 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. Sometimes a creative timeout is just going to the bathroom, coming back to your office. It's to interrupt the process from escalating. But what people forget is you got to go back to the person and say, I'm ready to talk about this now, rather than just drop it. And 3, I would say the most important difference between people who do their best. Nobody does better under pressure. It's a myth. Nobody rises to the occasion. That is a sports fallacy. That's for the movies, but that's not real life. The key is not to do worse. And people who do their best, the biggest difference between people who do their best and people who choke, do below their best when they want to do their best, is perception of the situation. Think of it as an opportunity, as a challenge, or as fun. If you think of it as a threatening situation, like giving a presentation, I used to think when I first started teaching at UCLA, this is an opportunity to promote myself and educate people and to have fun and to be like a little Johnny Carson entertaining people. I didn't think of it as threatening, because if you think of it as threatening, then you have trepidation and you can't be confident. So those are some basics that I want, some take homes to remember. And those seniors who are listening, just remember, if you meet somebody online, they're lying. I'm glad you're laughing, because people should also, for anger management, have at least 10 laughs a day, 3 of which should be belly laughs. And I think you might have gotten some.